Now, Curtis, can you hear me? Hello.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I can hear you. I'm not turning on my camera, Aunt Daphne, though. I'm going to mute myself again, okay?
No worries. Oh. I am ready. I need to share my screen. Curtis. I'm not set up yet.
Hi, Martha.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Policy on the Rock 2021. We have a great day planned for you, and it's a full one. My name is Martha Mazechka, and I am your moderator today. I'll keep everyone on schedule, and I'll call on the speakers each in turn, as well as provide a brief introduction and to their name and topic. Before we get started, though, I would like to begin with an important acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has now been erased forever. We also acknowledge the island of Uktahunguk as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. And we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassina, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatukavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for us all. I would now like to welcome Daphne March, advocate with the First Voice Urban Indigenous Coalition, who will now offer an opening prayer.
Good morning. Can I have everyone to come sit with their spine straight? Close your eyes if you feel to do so. Take a nice deep breath in and out. Take your right hand, put it in your heart center, and your left hand over your right hand. Creator, open our hearts to peace and healing between all people. Creator, open our hearts to provide and protect all children of the earth. Creator, open our hearts to respect for the earth and all gifts of the earth. Creator, open our hearts to inclusion, violence, and fear among all people. Thank you for the gifts of this day and every day that make my prayer. Shama Shah.
Thank you, Daphne, for creating a space where we may be thoughtful and work with intention throughout today. I would now like to ask Penelope Rowe to speak.
Everybody, and thanks very much, Martha, for taking on the job of organizing this event for us. And I'd like to also say thank you at the beginning to everybody who has joined us as registrants for this session and who will be joining us through live streaming. We've got a fabulous group of participants from all across the province, from many different sectors, walks of life, and particular backgrounds. So I'm just really delighted that we're having this session today, March 29th. Serendipitously, it coincides with the election of a new Liberal administration, who will be, I expect, as of today, planning their way forward for the next few years. It's important for us all to recognize that one of the primary commitments in the policy platform of our new administration was a commitment to undertaking a review of our existing poverty reduction strategy, particularly relating to housing, food security, and poverty reduction. And a strong commitment to working with stakeholders, to consulting, and to working with us all as we move forward. Very big commitment, and we need to make sure that it gets to the top of the priority list. CSC is ready to move forward, to take leadership and to reignite public engagement for everybody, and to find a way that all voices are heard. We'll be taking leadership, we'll be amplifying the voices of people on the ground, but also we'll be doing what is our primary interest, mobilizing the voices of the community sector. So it's important to find ways that we engage in these policy deliberations. In other words, we need to engage so that we can all be part of the solution, so that we can move forward to a brighter future for all of the residents of the province. Also important as a commitment from our new administration is to develop an important health accord, a health accord which is looking specifically at the social determinants of health and finding ways to advance health equity in this province. CSC's vision, coincidentally, is for a prosperous and inclusive society that supports individuals, families, and communities. We will rigorously advance that vision. Working with vibrant communities, working with all of you, we will push forward to ensure that Newfoundland and Labrador becomes a place where all residents, where all citizens, with people who live here, people who are from here, and people who come here, have a prosperous and healthy opportunity to survive, to live well, and to have a much brighter future. Finally, I just want to say thank you to Darlene Scott, who has been the leader in pulling together this forum today. And Darlene, I don't know if you knew when you started what a wonderful day March 29th would be in terms of the timing of the future of this province. I hope you all have an informative and productive day, and I look forward to all of the discussions. And a particular thank you to all of our speakers who will be leading our discussion, responding to the discussion, and making sure that this is a wonderful, informative day for us all. And I know, Martha, you'll be introducing all of our wonderful speakers as you progress through the morning. So thanks again to everybody, and good luck. Have a great day.
Thank you, Penny. It certainly is a very, very good day. We have two key speakers this morning. Each speaker will be followed by a panel of discussants. And I invite you to use the chat to share any insights or aha moments that you may have in response to the speakers. While we'll not be taking questions this morning, in this afternoon session, we will have an opportunity to move into breakout rooms so that you can reflect and share other insights with smaller groups of people. We do plan to produce a report after today's events, and we'll also be making some other materials in terms of recordings at a later date. So do keep an eye on the CSC website, and we'll apprise you of when information becomes available to you. So I now like to welcome our first speaker, Sister Elizabeth Davis. It's a great honor for me to introduce Sister Elizabeth. I'm familiar with her work over the years. And currently, Sister Elizabeth is the co-chair of the Newfoundland and Labrador Health Accord with Dr. Pat Parfrey. The Health Accord has been working over the past few months, gathering feedback and insights across the province. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to sign up for a town hall and to listen to what people are saying about our health future. They are looking to identify solutions and directions to improve the health of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. So I now welcome Sister Elizabeth, and when you'd like me to advance your slides, Sister, you can just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha, very much. And I thank all of the organizers today for inviting me to present on the Health Accord. We certainly need our voices heard by everybody in the province, and your outreach is quite significant. So thank you for the opportunity. I would want to thank Daphne for the powerful prayer this morning, which placed us in this sacred space among holy people. So thank you, Daphne. When we, in November of last year, the Premier at the time, Premier Fury, and the Minister of Health and Community Services established a task force on health. They asked Dr. Pat Parfrey and me to co-chair that task force. They really gave us a significant leeway in terms of how we would position it and who we would invite to be part of it. As you can see from the symbol on the screen right now, when we began, Martha, could I ask you to go back for 1 second? When we began, we were insistent on 2 points. The first was that this would be about health, not healthcare or the healthcare system, but about the health of the people of this province. Secondly, we said it had to be an accord, meaning what we want to come out of this exercise is an agreement among the people of the province, community organizations within the province, and government about how we move forward. We believe from the beginning that we need a dramatic culture shift in this province, and that can only happen if we do it together. The symbol we used, we hope, reflects that. We have the 2 pieces, the island and Labrador. We have the colors of the land and the sea and the air, colors that reflect this whole sacred space, but also colors that show the diversity among us, the voices, the multiple voices that we need to hear. Now we move on, Martha. Why did we think that we really needed a culture change? Why wasn't a simple reorganization of the healthcare system enough? Pat Parfrey and his previous slide, Martha. Pat Parfrey and his team had done significant work gathering evidence done by many researchers over time, and really 6 significant facts became evident. And these facts, when you look at them together, are quite startling. We only use 6 of them to make the point that change has to happen. The first fact is that when you compare the people of our province with the people of other provinces in Canada, on average, we have worse life expectancy, the highest death rates from cancer, heart disease, and stroke, and the highest rate of chronic disease in Canada. That is an astounding, sadly astounding fact. You would never know that, though, when you look at health spending. Clearly, these chronic illnesses are rooted in social factors. Yet, in the past 40 years, we have increased social spending by 6%, while we increased spending for all healthcare by 232%. The third fact is when you compare our health system to other health systems across the country, by many metrics, we have the worst performing system. Yet the fourth fact tells us that we spend more per capita than any other province in Canada. Now that would lead you to conclude that we have the worst value for health spending in the country. The fifth fact is equally astounding, but not unknown to any of us who live here. In the past 50 years, we have seen a dramatic shift in our population. In 1971, we had 200,000 people under the age of 15 and 30,000 people over the age of 65. Today, we have 70,000 people under the age of 15, and we have 120,000 over the age of 65. We also have seen a dramatic move from rural parts of this province to urban areas like St. John's and cities outside the province. So our sixth fact would say to us that the health system we created was a system built for a population that no longer exists. And therefore, we need to rebalance that health system in a different way than it is today between community-based services and hospital-based services. Now, those six facts, any one of them is astounding. Taken together, you can see why a mere reorganization of the system is not enough. In attempting to look at how we would address these facts, Pat and I agreed that we would have 6 strategic areas, and for each area, we would create a committee who would look closely at that. The 6 areas are the social determinants of health, primary health care, which we've since changed to community care, hospital services, an aging population, quality health care, and digital technology. So what has begun to happen then is the task force itself, which is the large body that oversees this. Each of those committees working with that task force have begun to do 2 things. One, they just began to get their heads around what needs to be done here, and now have developed direction statements for each of those 6 policy areas. Now, to do that, they spoke to people right across this province and outside. There were over 24 town halls. We had many, many exchanges with groups of people. We've had meetings with individuals. We've had in meetings with people who have particular expertise in some of these areas. We have gathered the information, developed draft directions, went back to all the people we had talked to previously, and now have these directions almost completed. The second phase of our work will start about mid-April, when we will look at how do we implement these directions. When we went to the people with the directions initially, we were amazed at the high level of agreement with the directions we have named. Just to show you on the next slide, when we looked at information, the next slide, Martha. When we looked at information, the regional health authorities had all done community-based surveys. Over 8,000 people participated in these. The previous slide, Martha, please. When they shared with us the fruits of their surveys, they were amazingly consistent with the work that we had done ourselves. As you can see here, when you look first at Eastern Health, Central Health, and Western Health, The issues are very clearly consistent across those 3 regions. When you look at Labrador Grenfell, which collected the information differently, so we couldn't use the same format, the next slide would show that they're amazingly consistent with the issues across Eastern Health, Community Health, and Western Health. Attention to mental health and addictions, attention to high cost of living, food insecurity, lack of resources for seniors. Labrador had one additional concern, the previous slide, which is around language and culture. We were gratified and felt affirmed in the directions we have chosen, but we were also nuanced those statements based on the input we received. Many cases, it was just language improvement. Other cases, there were new elements that were introduced. In this work, just to be clear, we're using a definition of health that is the accepted definition, I suspect, around the world now, and would be for this the Community Sector Council, which is a state of complete physical, emotional, and mental health, not just an absence of illness or injury. And we are quite concerned with the previous facts of the desperate health inequality we experience compared to the rest of Canada. But we also know within this place, there is also health inequity between groups in the province. So we use this image to help explain that. We will modify the image to make it more Newfoundland and Labrador friendly. But the point, I think, if you look at the image, is well taken. Inequality, the boxes are all the same. But because people are not all the same, everybody can't see over that fence. When we make equity, we do create the boxes the same. Now everybody can see the game. When we see through the eyes of justice, though, we take the fence away. Nobody needs boxes to stand on. And when we're truly trying to get to inclusion, not only can everybody see the game, but everybody is able to participate in it. So we're using images like that in our work, recognizing that people learn more from images than we really do from words. When we looked then at all of the direction statements that the 6 groups had developed, we created one image, the previous one, we created one image, no, the next one, Martha. The slides seem to be moving a bit erratically.
They seem to have developed a mind of their own, sister, and I do apologize. We're working on it.
Okay, no, that's fine, Martha. So when we put all the words together, because it doesn't make sense at all, if each committee did its own thing, we still wouldn't achieve the culture change we're talking about. This will only work when everything is integrated. So as we integrate the major statements here, this is what we find. And again, I will tell you a high degree of support we heard. We will improve the health of the people of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians if we address specific areas of concern relating to social, economic, and environmental factors, if we empower people to transition seamlessly through age-related health changes, if we balance the health system with an accessible, team-based network of community and hospital services, if we ensure high-quality health care in social and health systems, and if we creatively use digital technology to connect systems and people and to link health and social factors. So I want to show you 2 examples from that, just to show you what is emerging. With the Social Determinants of Health Committee, which is the committee I chair and Penny Rose a member, we see their statement had 5 pieces to it. First, we know, no matter where you look in the world, that social, economic, and environmental factors have the leading impact on health. What we don't know is which of these are particularly related to the health inequity in this province. And there is not good research available for that. So we work on that. We also know that if we're going to work with we need to work with some areas here to really make a difference. So we're going to engage more with communities to find what these areas are. But as Penny said earlier, four seem to be emerging quite clearly: poverty, food security, housing security, and early childhood development. Obviously, they're all interconnected, but these are the four that have been most brought to our attention. We also know the healthcare system itself has responsibility for promoting health equity, but we need ways to ensure that the system is attending to that. We also like this health in all policies approach, which is now being used around the world by state governments, is being looked at by our own province. We are encouraging municipalities to engage in that as well. The new area we're working towards, however, is to broaden it even further to public institutions like Memorial University or the College of the North Atlantic, to community organizations, and to the private sector. So when anybody is making a decision, they're always asking the question, how much will it cost? We want them to always ask the question, whose health will be impacted positively or negatively by our decision? And finally, we know there are strengths beyond strengths across this province. We need to build on these strengths, and we need to really have that cross-sectoral approach that says every organization has an impact on the health of people. Therefore, every organization has to be responsible for us improving that health outcome in this province. One of the areas that you have particular interest this morning as well is the Digital Technology Committee. Its statement says that they believe that digital technology can also help improve health and health outcomes for this province because it can empower us with information, access, and choice. It has that capacity to connect people and systems, to integrate systems, and to link health and social factors. Assuming that it uses an agile and evidence-based approach, it also can ensure there's innovation in how we approach health and health outcomes. Indeed, they would go further and speak of a culture of innovation that becomes a driving force for inclusion. In our work with that committee, integrating it across the other 5 committees, we become aware that the United Nations itself has now begun to get into this work. And I want to share a little bit of that, where they are at this point, just for your information, but to see how complex these issues are. The United Nations Secretary General set up a high-level panel on digital cooperation, and they asked that panel to report to the Commission on Social Development, which met this past February, and at their meeting, they discussed and endorsed this report. That places it now on a very high United Nations agenda, if you will. What is important about this report is that it links digital cooperation, digital technology, to social development and well-being. So it's a conscious decision to look at the digital world and see how we can move in this age of digital interdependence, how we can truly use that to strengthen the well-being of people across this globe. So I'm going to quote some pieces from their documents just to show you how really important our work is in this area, but how linked it is with global thinking now. We could go back 1 second, Martha, to the previous slide. They note that digital dividends exist with digital divides. That's their message throughout their documentation. They believe there must be a level of cooperation which allows this digital world to address social, ethical, legal, and economic impact so that we maximize the benefit and minimize the harm. They also are insistent that all of this work be rooted in common human values, inclusiveness, respect, human-centeredness, human rights, human flourishing, transparency, collaboration, accessibility, harmony, and sustainability. In the next slide, we see they speak to the need for policy networks to support economic and social inclusion. And they're quite insistent on the need to include traditionally marginalized groups in this conversation, to speak to investments in human capital as well as in infrastructure, to have regulatory environments which are not there now to deal with this. And they also recognize that improvements or advancement in the digital technology will have impact on the workplace for many, and that needs to be addressed. They also speak strongly to financial inclusion, which is a mystery to most of us around the digital technology world, mobile money, digital identification and e-commerce, affordable and meaningful access to the internet, digital public goods, the future of education, and an awful lot of work being done in that area, as well as regional and global economic policy cooperation. And finally, that report speaks strongly, the next slide, to the fact that by 2030, it is their goal that every adult should have affordable access to digital networks, as well as digitally enabled financial and health services, explicit in their statement. If the United Nations and all the country members of the United Nations are able to achieve the sustainable development goals that they have set. I think that's a remarkable goal. We have said in our work within within Health Accord NL that we hope by 2026 to have achieved this. And they are very clear, which we would be supportive of indeed, that the more diverse voices are at the table from developing countries and from the traditionally marginalized groups. They name particularly women, youth, indigenous peoples, rural populations, and older people. So this is just one example of how our work as Health Accord NL is part of a very, very much larger global reality. And it is within that reality that we work in our own regional area of Newfoundland and Labrador to bring about the kind of change we need to reach better health outcomes, and come much closer to health equity between us and others in Canada and within our own province. As Penny said at the beginning, we can't do that alone. We can't do that in our traditional divides. If we don't find the ways to come together to make this happen, it will not be happening. And we deserve that it happen. This week, as many of you know, is a holy week for two major religious traditions. For the Jewish people, these are the Passover days. For Christians, these days are leading to Easter. We're also in the midst of a very troubling year of this pandemic time. So with that in mind, I want to give you a simple blessing. My blessing comes to you in gratitude for the work every person on this call is doing to make our society better, more just, more peaceful, and healthier. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. The next slide. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. Together, let us help build better that invisible cloak of health, of peace, and of justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Elizabeth. That was a most interesting presentation. I really appreciate your sharing the issues around digital interdependence. It seems that we're all connected in many different ways, but not all of us have the same access to that form of connection. And I think it is something that bears thinking about, and I appreciate your time this morning. We have identified the gremlin in the inside the computer. I've given it a stern talking to, and I hope it reflects on its poor behavior. But I apologize to those of you who had to experience my attempt to control that gremlin. As part of our panel this morning, we have discussants who will provide additional insights and reflection. We have Catherine Dodge, Daphne March, and Norma Alford. We are going to begin with Daphne, as Catherine has not been able to log on at the moment. So Daphne will be speaking on Indigenous health issues, and I will ask you now to address your topic for this morning. Daphne?
Good morning. Thank you again. Thank you, Sister Elizabeth. Your presentation really gave me hope. So thank you for that. So as Indigenous people in Canada, we have the highest rate of suicide, mental health, and addictions. This system is failing our people, and we need to do something with this problem yesterday. As a lot of people know, that we carry as Indigenous people a lot of trauma from no fault of our own for generations and generations. So my question would be on this subject is, you know, the committees that is set up, are we Indigenous people in these committees that Sister Elizabeth is talking about this morning? I'm not sure about that. I hope we are. And to be in this sitting today, I'm very thankful as an Indigenous person off this land. But it's still like my father always said, action. Words is great, but action is even better, you know, as we look forward to that. As Indigenous people, we need to speak on our own health, our own wellness, because we know our own selves, we know our own people. And our voices needs to be heard, but actions needs to be done, you know. So from my personal experience, I have seen many and many times as a mother, as a daughter, as myself, as a cousin, as many people I love been over medicated in the system. And to watch that as a person, it's just heartbreaking. We need to do something about that problem yesterday. We are losing our children. Is a huge problem. So I hope that moving forward with this accord and with the commitment that the Premier is after putting forward and all the work that's been done around this, that's something that we really got to look at. I remember when I volunteer in our community with a lot of people, and when this young guy down on downtown St. John's, homeless, and it brings tears to my eyes. And he looked at me, he said, Daphne, he said, the Newfoundland government is paying for my addiction. Wow. So this is not a finance problem. This is a human problem that we're facing here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we got to look at this head on today, because again, we're losing our children, we're losing our people. Food. I've been sitting by a lot of people in the hospital when they come out of surgery, or they're dealing with addictions or mental health or whatever. And the food that's brought up on trays of sugar is unbelievable. When I start my journey on my healing, it was a long process, and I'm still working on that today. But food has always been a big part of that. And I remember in the global community that I'm involved in, they call sugar as a gateway drug. Wow, that really blew my mind. And I looked at the sugar intake that was given to me as a child, the Pepsis and the Coke that I drank, the starchy food that we grow like potatoes, and the Kraft Dinner that are people that can't afford to buy anything else but Kraft Dinner. With the food banks, that the food that's giving out is a lot of that food. Those little things got to be changed within our systems. You know, I know that what would be really amazing is that we would bring holistic healing, our 7 teachings of Indigenous teaching into our health and wellness here in Newfoundland. We become a standard for other places in Canada. We bring the health and wellness, we bring the holistic healing, the 7 generations of teachings of Indigenous people, along with science. It will be amazing. I have many opportunities to travel around the world because when I became and looked at myself, that I knew it was nothing here on this island for me. I had to leave. I had to leave Canada. I had to go to other places in the world. I seeked out and researched the people that was doing such things that I wanted for me and my people. And I found that I truly did. And they're doing fabulous work. And I want to bring that back to Newfoundland, but we really need to be included and we need to bring it back. But I've been lucky enough, I've been living in St. John's for 25 years. I lived my territory of Gillams in the Bay of Islands, my people. And I worked with the family medicine in St. John's. My doctor is Scott Moffat, and he knew my family history. He knew my son's situation. He knew my dad's situation. And he worked with me. So, you know, this system is already in place. It's just for us to walk into it and bring our resources and make it, you know, make it what we are as people. I remember calling my sister, and we talked for hours about, you know, our problem in our family, about our community and where we came from. We didn't know we were Indigenous people. I grew up that my father was called the Jackitar. He had dark skin and brown eyes in our community. I carried a lot of shame with that. I didn't want to have no part of it. But with my talking to other people, I had to embrace my culture in order for me to, you know, to get back to who I needed to be as a person. So we talked for hours, me and my sister, and we used to joke and say, you know what, Daphne, we are a great case study for this, you know? And I said, yeah, we are, you know, so we could laugh at ourselves, but we also got to know that we need help. We need this community and to be part of it. And the work that is done in St. John's with First Voice and the First Light, and Stacy's here on the call today, and Justin, what they are doing as committee is amazing. In the city of St. John's, and you guys now including us, it brings us hope. And I want to say thank you to you guys for this. And for my end story on this talk today, I just want to say that today more than ever, we need intelligent, emotional intelligence. We have it in education here in St. John's and in Newfoundland, but we also need help in helping people be who they're supposed to be and be able to see that the people that's helping us, they need empathy, we need kindness, and we need education for our people to say that it's not the individual, it's the illness. Our people are dying alone on our streets, are in our hospitals. It's heartbreaking. All my relations, thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. I really appreciate the passion with which you bring your words to us today. I was really struck about your reference to presence, to essentials like food, the value of knowledge and action from your shared communities, and your identity. Sister Elizabeth has an answer to your question that you posed at the start, so I'll call on Sister to respond.
Daphne, just to say from the very beginning, we knew that we must work with the governments of the 5 Indigenous communities in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. We have been from very early speaking with the leadership in the five communities. We do have members on the on the task force, William Anderson has just joined from the Nunatsiavut government as a member of the task force. And we are waiting from Chief Mitchell from the Halapu community to give us a second member for the task force. On the committees, Eva Roberts and John Jador from the Conn River Mi'kmaq community are members of the task force. Michelle Kinney from the Nunatsiavut community is a member of the task of the committees. We also are awaiting members from the other communities to the committees. We had recently a very rich Halapu town hall with Chief Mitchell leading that, and quite passionate voices like yours included in that. We are going soon to do a series of talks on OK Radio with the Nunatsiavut government, and we have upcoming meetings with the leadership of the Nunatukuvut community in Labrador and the Nitassinan Innu in Labrador. So we are respecting the different governments that are involved here, but we are also very deeply engaging with individuals to be part of the process. Our goal is to engage more fully with communities for two reasons. One, because we know the health status is inequitable compared to other groups within the province. And secondly, because of the deep wisdoms that you mentioned that Indigenous peoples can bring. Everything from the care and love of the land and the sea, the respect for relations among all earth beings, holistic ways of approaching health and healthcare, all of which are helpful for us in this work of changing our culture. So what you spoke to resonates very deeply with us within Health Accord, and we're really working very, very hard to find practical, feasible, workable ways to engage with the people in the Indigenous communities. So I hope that's helpful to you in terms of understanding where we are at this moment in time.
Thank you, sister. Appreciate that insight. And thank you, Daphne, for your words this morning. I'd like to now call upon Norma Alford, who is going to speak to us about the digital divide, the lessons learned from CSCNL's Techno Tutors program. I'm just going to pause a moment to share my screen so that I can put up Norma's slides and make sure that everything functions the way it ought to. Okay, thank you, Norma.
Thank you, Martha. And much thanks to Daphne. Your passion is just intoxicating. So lovely to hear you speak. And Sister Elizabeth, I didn't have advance notice of your presentation, but a lot of what I'm going to say actually links in. And it's very exciting to see the importance of digital technology and awareness and knowledge in the province's health accord. Martha, if you could advance the next slide. So I'm representing Techno Tutors, which is a project of Community Sector Council. And essentially, in a nutshell, what we do is teach people to use the internet for their day-to-day lives. And so that's why when I hear talk from the Health Accord about integrating the use of digital technology, the internet, I think that integrates really well with what we do and what we work on a daily basis. Next slide. So we've been around since 2019, and I wanted to share some stats for you. We've helped to date over 995 individuals learn more about their digital devices and to use the internet. We've done this through over 400 in-person and virtual classes, reaching all regions of Newfoundland and Labrador, including quite north, and all the points in between, spanning multiple provinces, and we've even had participants from other countries join us. We've developed over 60 unique and original digital literacy curriculum. We teach topics from basic hardware operations, literally the how to turn your tablet on classes, to social media, to hosting Zoom meetings, and pretty much everything in between. And we've done this through the development of partnerships with over 35 amazing organizations and counting. And I share these stats, not just as kind of a toss out and a round of applause for my team who makes all this happen, but to say that we are a very small group of people who do this work, and to see the volume and the number of people we've worked with, we know the need is still great within our province. So what have we learned in the past couple of years about the digital divide in Newfoundland and Labrador? Well, first and foremost, it crosses socioeconomic boundaries. There's a time, Martha just, yep, thanks. And so as Sister Elizabeth noted this morning, the UN report talks about affordable and meaningful access to internet. What we have seen is that literacy, digital literacy, is not bounded by money or access to income. What we do see is access to devices and access to connectivity. It's hugely determined by the level and source of an individual's income. In the past year, a great example, those of us who have the knowledge and the ability to tap into internet and technology have been able to maintain our employment, continue supporting ourselves and our families. Other jobs, other individuals who've been unable to do that have had significant employment loss and income loss. The other point in access is the high cost of internet and data packages in our province and in our country. It is incredibly expensive to have a home Wi-Fi of a good quality. The next point is that the digital divide is not just a rural problem. So while certainly access is a significant challenge for many of our rural and remote communities, we've heard lots of stories of some individuals and communities continuing to rely on dial-up, if they're lucky even to have that. Urban issues also relate to costs, and they also relate to access. So while many in our remote communities can't access at home, we find that in our larger communities as well. And people often rely on public Wi-Fi. And again, over the past year, what we've seen is when those hotspots like libraries, fast food restaurants close, a significant amount of vulnerable populations lose their access and their connectivity. On top of that, public Wi-Fi can be a little more unsafe and a little more unreliable, which again puts many individuals at risk. Next. The digital divide has no age limit. So we have worked with everyone from teenagers to those well in their 80s and probably above if I pull the exact stats. What we learn is people across those ages struggle with different varieties of digital literacy, digital access. And this is not as so often in the research and so often comes out an issue for our older and our senior population, but many of our youth do not have the skills to look for jobs online, for example, or keep themselves safe in social media settings. And my last learning, which relates directly to what Sister Elizabeth has said, and something that's become very important to us as a team, is that the digital divide is detrimental to the health and well-being of so many individuals within our communities. As Sister Elizabeth noted, the idea behind using digital technology is to empower people with information, access, and choice. If you do not have access and you do not have information, you are at a significant disadvantage to making choices about your own life, your own health, and well-being. In the past year, we've seen incredible positives about digital technology. We were able to share global knowledge about COVID-19. We could actually watch it moving across the world like never before. And it led to rapid vaccination development as scientists around the globe worked together. At the same time, the pandemic has shone a very, very bright light on the issue of inequality with digital technology. The information was primarily distributed electronically, whether that was case updates or vital life-saving information about how to protect yourself and your family. In-person services for physical and mental health primarily moved to virtual platforms. In working with a counselor, for example, if you do not have the ability to have a video call, that counselor or that doctor has limited ability to see your body language, to do a proper assessment, to make proper diagnosis and treatment. We've also seen and heard of cases where individuals did not even know there was a pandemic because of a lack of connection. And again, putting themselves, their families at risk. And the final point on sort of the health and well-being is the need for social connection. We are by nature social animals. We need to be with people. And if you are in a situation where you cannot see your family, speak to your family or your friends, again, you become isolated, which is detrimental on your mental health. One of the things that has been coming out in so many studies over the past year is a decline in mental health across the country, an increase in issues like domestic violence. And some of those, not all, some can be assisted and helped alleviated through the use of digital technology. Next slide, Martha. So this is a comment coming out of the UN Secretary General in June of 2020. And it's something that for me over the past year has really spoken deeply to my thoughts and my guidance for our program and for my own life. What I keep returning to, one of the greatest lessons perhaps, is that access to digital devices and the internet is not a luxury anymore. For so often, it was a nice to have if you could afford it, if you could buy the latest device. And it was often viewed as entertainment, pleasure. So it wasn't really something that you needed. However, what we've seen is that it absolutely necessity in our society if we want to achieve true equality, fairness, and inclusion. For individuals without access, they cannot access employment and education opportunities. Even something as simple as looking for housing or food in the past year, we've seen challenges. And again, this is a combination of digital literacy skill and access to the actual technology and internet. They go hand in hand. We have come across individuals with amazing, wonderful skills, but cannot afford an updated device. And over last summer, CSC was involved in a project to distribute to date over 145 digital devices across this province, which was just a drop in the bucket, quite honestly. But one of the things that I noticed in looking at those applications and surprised me was the number of families with young children who were looking for support. I heard stories of parents trying to help their kids do homework on cell phones and realizing that their children were being put at a disadvantage in their education. And at times, being very upset themselves that they could not do better for their kids. And as a parent, those were always the most challenging for me, because you want the best for education. And then also one of the things we heard consistently is about access to healthcare. Again, to kind of circle back to this, being able to see a doctor or, have that call with your doctor, and being able to get information quickly into the hands of the people who need it is very, very important. And it has to be something that we address as a society and as a group as we move forward and as we try to aim for equality. Thanks.
My apologies, the screen sometimes sticks for me. Here you go.
So I just wanted to put our contact info. We are always happy to help and discuss further. Our website and our email, and we're all over social media. The contact at TechnoTutor are a couple of important numbers. If you call those, you'll go directly to our staff or text them, and they're always happy to help somebody walk through a simple project. And again, we always say one of the issues, our greatest challenge is to break down fear, break down apprehension about the internet. And the other part is then to teach the skill. So we want to be open, a judgment-free zone. There is no stupid questions when you talk to us. Just ask my team. I ask them pretty much every day. And we really want to increase everyone's ability to interact and engage. Thanks, Martha.
Thank you, Norma. I really appreciate the information you've shared with us today. The blend of practical knowledge in terms of what you've heard from your participants and the trends that you have played out for us this morning certainly adds to our understanding in terms of the digital divide as well as the digital opportunity. Unfortunately, Catherine Dodge has not been able to join with us this morning, so I'm going to take advantage of this time and facilitate a little bit of back and forth between Sister Elizabeth, Norma, and Daphne. So I'd like to ask Sister Elizabeth first to add some insights with respect to Norma's presentation.
Norma, I really thank you for the presentation. It brought right to the ground the higher level comments that I had made relative to the United Nations movement. But just as importantly, I think it's given me more information to bring back to the Digital Technology Committee of Health Accord. And I would appreciate if you're willing to do that, if you would forward your contact information and the slides to me. Paul Preston is the chair of the Digital Technology Committee, who you may know, and I would certainly want to bring to him the richness of this conversation. I also am conscious that there's been, in the chat, there's been something that's underlying Daphne's presentation, my presentation, and Norma's, which is this very passionate push for a universal basic income, and how everything we've talked about has that single thread of poverty across it in so many ways, and including stigma, including access to the basic needs of life today, as opposed to 50 years ago. And it's a provincial issue and it's a federal issue. We have been clear within the task force, within the Newfoundland Health Accord NL, that we need to pursue this quite strongly, that it is an area where governments have always spoken about supporting it and have never done anything about it. It's a strange kind of phenomenon in that regard. But we can do it. Another lesson from COVID is that with all the money that was made available to individuals during this time of pandemic, that we can do these things that make sense. So I just want to acknowledge that too, because it really is basic to what the three of us spoke to and what I expect Catherine would have spoken to, having heard her in other times, strongly, even more strongly perhaps probably than the three of us did. So to make sure her voice is echoed through that, I just wanted to add that, Martha.
Thank you, Sister. Daphne, I see your mic is off. Would you like to share something?
Is it on now?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Regards of the digital information around that thing, it's just that a lot of our people in Indigenous small rural areas don't have that access, you know, and I've been using E-Ling modalities with Skype ever since 2014. And you know, and it's like all over the world, and it's amazing, you know, and it changed my world, it changed my life. And that we could do that for people in rural Newfoundland, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it? So thank you again for that.
So we've covered a lot of ground this morning, and I'm struck by the fact that we have issues around access, we have issues around knowledge, Norma, that you addressed in terms of, how to turn on a tablet to actually accessing critical information. I'm also hearing how there's a need for education across a number of professional sectors, if you will, with respect to providing services to people in our current pandemic and perhaps after, in terms of the challenging nature, beautiful as it is, of our environment and geography. Any thoughts in terms of what we might need to do going forward? Perhaps, Norma, I could start with you.
I guess in terms of the digital, again, education is a huge part. I think all of us who work in community, our instinct is quite often go visit our website, send us an email, and we have to recognize that that is not an option for so many. And when we respond in that manner, as Sister Elizabeth noted, the stigma, how many individuals walk away because they don't want to say, I don't have access, I can't send you an email, or I don't know how to send you an email. One of the very first sessions we did a long time ago, myself and a colleague, an individual had asked us about, I believe, finding a recipe. And we sort of looked at her and flippantly said, well, you would Google it. And within a second, we saw the look on her face of, oh my gosh, she actually doesn't know what Google means and what that phrase means. So when we push those things out to people and say, yes, this information is all available. Not everyone has the ability and the skill, the access and the education to reach those. And the other piece, of course, always comes down to money and investment by both governments and I would say also from the large internet service providers in getting into those rural small communities to provide access. And again, it's not just completely, the remote, the folks who live in very tiny communities. It doesn't take too far past the overpass before you run into challenges with access, because that's a key part of it. You can have all the ability, all the skill, all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't afford internet, if you can't access it, then all of that goes to waste. And as Daphne just mentioned about, doing your healing and having the ability to do that and offer that across the world, I often think how much talent and skill goes wasted or unheard of because that person can't reach out and connect. So I think there's work for all of us, Martha. I think as individuals, as community groups, as people, voters, to hold politicians and companies accountable to the people that we support and people that we serve.
Thank you, Norma. Sister Elizabeth, any thoughts that you would like to share?
First, to Norma's points, I think access is way more to than having a piece of equipment. How to use that equipment, not to be afraid of it, but to be careful of it as well, because as I think the United Nations General Secretary was saying, it's a source of inequality, but it can also be a source of abuse. Mm-hmm. And we've seen cyberbullying, for example, among young people has become quite a significant form of abuse now. So education at so many levels, not just how to use a keyboard or how to get into Skype or Zoom, but we've seen amazing things with our older sisters who told me there's no way they could possibly learn to use any of this. And when the pandemic came, I said, it's the only way you're going to be able to connect with your families. And all of a sudden, all of them have learned it. And we are on Zoom calls with sisters from all around the world, from Tonga and Samoa and from the Philippines and from South America, just having chats with our ordinary sisters, not the leaders who would have been the ones who did it in the past. So that's one thing COVID has forced us to, I think, is a new potential and possibility, but also a desperate innocence about the dangers. And we have to speak to that. And I really like that you keep mentioning that, Norma. I think, Daphne, your point too about how it can be used for healing sessions, for social connection in a way we hadn't imagined before. And we've experienced that in my congregation as well, with the sisters who have reached out in so many ways to offset the isolation that we're experiencing right now. So, that is so wise, a gift that you identify from this. But I do think the bigger question is, how do we prevent this from becoming a greater source of inequality and use it not just for business and commerce or even for social interaction, but truly begin to use it more intentionally for health and well-being? I think that's still a challenge for all of us. On your broader question, Martha, about what we do about all of this, I hope our provincial government, now that it's reinstated, I hope we have the courage as a province to truly stand together, to take this point in time when we're suffering so badly on so many levels, to take this point in time to say the divides among us cannot rule the day, that we have to find ways to maximize every gift that we have across all of the traditional divides. Because if we don't, I really feel quite distressed about the possible downward spiral we're going to get into. One of the reasons I said yes to chairing this health accord wasn't because I needed more work to do or I needed a new job. It was because I'm quite worried about our future as our population proportion shifts to older people. I don't care. I'm glad there are lots and lots more older people. I'm sad there are not lots more younger people. But we don't have a society that is able to deal with that disproportion of older people in it. We have to find it. We don't have a society that is able yet to bring about the reconciliation, Daphne, with Indigenous communities. We have to find it. We don't have a society that truly respects women as it does men and other genders. We have to find it. So this is the one time that we have enough crises happening together that I think we should, for just, even if it's only for 5 years, forget the divides and work together to make this place the kind of place we need it to be and we deserve it to be. And I think it's possible. The fact that 3 of us, 3 generations, were speakers today, and Catherine would have been part of that we come from totally different lived experience, and we're all saying the same thing. You talk about visible divides absolutely disappearing in a flash. So that's, Martha, that's my higher level point, I think. Some will say, you're awfully old to be so naive. I'm awfully old to know enough that we can do this if we each one puts our heart and mind into doing it. So everybody on this call has to be a leader in this. It can't just be a few people.
Thank you so much, sister. That's a wonderful place to stop, because I think that building that shared understanding, working together to, as I heard an elder talk last year, that when we're in the canoe, we all have to paddle together and have a vision of where we're going. And these opportunities to come together virtually or face-to-face at some point in the future to continue those conversations is critical. I'm going to break now for 4 minutes to allow you all to have a stretch break. It's really important, having done a lot of work in Zoom. So I encourage you to, if you are able to get up, walk around, do a few stretches to iron out any kinks, hydrate, get a glass of water or refill your coffee cup. But we will return at 11 o'clock on the dot. I thank you, Daphne and Norma, for sharing your particular insights from your communities. And thank you, Sister Elizabeth, for sharing the work of the Health Accord and particularly its vision. We'll see you here at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
TANNAMT
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a very quick break and a chance to stretch. For the second hour of our session this morning, we are going to hear from Sarah Crocker, the program coordinator at Food First NL, based in St. John's. And Sarah is going to speak to issues of food security and income, sharing community voices for system change. I'm now going to move to share screen while
Actually,
Sarah-
Martha, I'll speak and then you can share screen after.
No problem. You just give me the sign. And speaking of signing, I do want to let people know that we have our ASL interpreters this morning. So I thank you for the great work that you're doing to ensure that our session is accessible this morning for people who are hearing impaired. So thank you. Currently, I see Dana. So hello, Dana. And Sarah, over to you.
Thanks so much, Martha. Really so pleased to be here with everyone today. Just listening to all the speakers this morning, it's really interesting how the pandemic has impacted our ability to connect. So thank you, CSC, for bringing us all together today. Just a quick look at the participant list on the Zoom meeting. I see food animators and working group members involved with the St. John's Food Assessment, past and present Food Policy Council members, Wellness Coalition members, market vendors, like collaborators of all kinds. So many people have been talking about food already this morning at Policy on the Rock. So I'm really pleased to bring forward some stories and a project that I'm working on. I just poured up a cup of tea, so this is par for the course with our pandemic experience of virtually having people over, like yourselves, coworkers and colleagues into your home. It's such a great way to connect when it is possible across the digital divide. So even though my role at Food First NL has involved offering hands-on workshops over the years in different parts of the province, I've never done one with my own kid, peeking up over the counter, having my coworkers in my kitchen with me. So I wanted to tell you about a workplace workshop we did in February. Food First NL staff, along with this volunteer group of food animators, one of whom, Debbie, you'll hear from later this morning, took part in a food justice workshop. We prepared a meal together by Zoom and considered our own role in the food system. The facilitator was from another organization based in Toronto, and she had us all cooking her family's comfort food from Jamaica. We created a squash soup with spinners, which are a little kind of dumpling, and we had salt cod cakes. And the deeper theme throughout was connecting food and race for food justice. Of course, you know, if you've gone grocery shopping, things definitely take more time nowadays with pandemic lockdown. And to get ready for this event, I put together the ingredient kits with my colleague. We found salt cod from Goodwater Seafood. I went to 4 different grocery stores to find everything, including Jamaican curry. And what a wonder it was to find really good fresh habanero peppers here on an island in the North Atlantic in the middle of winter. We could even cover a few extra items for folks that didn't have the necessary kitchen supplies at hand. And then we delivered it all in a snowstorm. So no contact in our drop-off, but you can bet we were warmed through by the end. So as our group explored these different connections between food and race, we were unpacking some of those colonial impacts on our food system. And we're able to draw inspiration from each other, sharing what we've experienced firsthand, and then wrap it all up with a really nourishing meal. So that was a fantastic experience. Being able to buy the food we wanted, to share a meal with each other. I realize that's not the experience. It's not the experience of many in our city, in our province, or across the global food system. So when people can't afford food, it's called food insecurity. You might just be 5 minutes from a grocery store. You could have apps on your phone and know how to use them, but you simply can't buy the food you need. The project I'll be highlighting today is a St. John's food assessment. And before we launched this project, we understood the significance of food insecurity across the province. In Newfoundland and Labrador, 14.7% of households experience food insecurity. And within the city, the rate is higher. It's 1 in 6 households, just over 16%. And that's actually the highest rate of all metropolitan cities in Canada. Food insecurity means sometimes substituting on the amount or quality of food that you have. It could mean skipping meals or going without. And just to build on Sister Davis's talk this morning, food insecurity causes many health issues. People who experience food insecurity are more likely to develop diabetes, heart disease, or high blood pressure. And then the stress and the stigma and social isolation, it leads to high rates of anxiety, depression, and even suicide. For children who experience food insecurity, the impact is felt throughout their lives. It affects their learning and behavior, and it limits our opportunities to engage with friends and community. So I'll ask Martha to share my slides now, if you could. So I can go into a bit more detail on the food assessment, just one part of these larger problems. A food assessment is a way of engaging with each other, of informing people and policymakers so that everyone can take action on food. This is an ongoing process over the next year approximately. And one thing that we've recently concluded is a survey. This was an online survey asking people where and how they got food, what helps them make their ends meet, and the changes they wanted to see most. We were so pleased to receive 802 responses. Because we asked people their postal codes, we know that we received responses from every area of the city. And now I'll highlight just a few key findings for discussion, but if you could please visit foodstjohns.ca. Sorry, Martha, I'm back on the other one. You could learn more about our activities, the sponsors, and all the content we've created there. So the next slide on transportation, we asked people the most common way to get to food. 75% of people across the city drive their own personal vehicle to get food. 13% use active transportation. That includes walking, wheeling, or biking. And very few use the bus or got a ride, just 5% bus ridership and 4% ride sharing. These figures are likely impacted by both the time of year. The survey was open through January and February. So February, tons of winter storms and as well a COVID-19 lockdown. So St. John's was in the alert level 5, and all along this past year, our public health guidance has been to keep a small bubble and limit the number of shopping trips. These are interesting figures across the city, but we also looked at transportation in different ways. So next slide, Martha. We looked at how transportation varied by income. So overall, throughout our survey respondents, 75% of people are using their own car, but there's a very different reality depending on your income. Only 25% of people making 20,000 or less would use their own vehicle. Between 20 to 29,000, it's nearly half. And then you can see that the rates of vehicle usage increase with income. By the time people are making 50, the majority are using their own vehicle. So we see that to get to work, to school, for shopping and other activities, there's this necessity of having a vehicle. And for further research, we could show how that might be prioritized over other types of spending. We also know that the cost of having your own personal vehicle for these necessary trips represents a significant portion of the total income of a household. So this also would impact the type of places you can shop at and how often you might travel there. Throughout this survey, it's not just the numbers. We asked people to share their personal experiences of food in the city. So next slide, I want to share a quote with you about this transportation piece. It's a shame that most grocery stores are on the outskirts of town. My family is doing okay and we eat well, but with the increased cost, the money available for food isn't going as far as it used to. So it takes careful planning and a lot of cutting back. This person in the survey connected, how our neighborhoods are designed, their personal experience of having to cut back, and touched on some of these issues around increasing cost of food, but perhaps stagnant income. We also asked about different programs that help people make ends meet. So we'll go to the next slide, Martha. We asked from a list of food programs, community-based programs. This included community gardens, healthy baby clubs, meal drop-ins, food banks, anything that could help fill some obvious gaps. Given that high rate of food insecurity, maybe you wouldn't be surprised to know that 10% of survey respondents had used a food bank. We know from research and studies that food banks are often considered a last resort for people who are experiencing the most severe food insecurity. We also know a lot about the kinds of foods that are available in this way and how they don't support a lot of individual choices and healthy food, which is needed to impact some of those other health concerns. We also noticed that of this question, 78% had used none of these types of programs at all. So food programs are not really a universal way to get food. It was interesting as well that about 40% wanted to know what was available in their neighborhood. So there is some work to do here to connect people and build that vibrancy around supportive food environments. Again, I'm so thankful to the people who shared their voice throughout this survey, and I have another quote from a respondent in their own words. This was quite a long quote, and I did have to cut out a little part, but I think it gets to the heart of things here. The quote is, "It's very degrading to get the courage to ask for help and then have no choice but to go back again the next month. Have you ever eaten an outdated Cheese Whiz hot dog sandwich for every meal in a day? In 2? I'm glad to have something, but it's hard to feel like society thinks I matter when that's my reality while I'm on long-term disability." We also asked people about the changes that they wanted to see in their own communities, and I'll spend a bit of time on the next slide explaining that. This final aspect of the survey question was to rank 5 changes, possible changes that people wanted to see in their neighborhood. What would make the biggest impact on food in their neighborhood? Overwhelmingly, income solutions was number 1. Whether it was better wages, income support, or universal income programs, this was the top choice by a wide margin. I'll just read out the other ones. The second choice, most ranked, top ranked, was retail changes, so changes in places to shop and buy food. Then transportation, so improvements to local transportation systems. Number 4 was increasing and preserving access to be able to grow, fish, or hunt. And then 5th was new or improved food programs. This was ranked quite low. And I'm very grateful to our, we have a student intern, Andrew Tsai, who is a Memorial University graduate student, who really did the work of analyzing how people ranked these items. I mentioned that income solutions was number 1. We broke down this question for every income bracket. So from folks making less than 20,000 to people making more than 100,000 in their household. Every single income bracket recognized this is a key area to focus on. It was very strongly indicated between people who are making 50 to 80,000 a year in their household. And I think that speaks to a threshold where a lot of people are moving maybe from subsidized rents. They might have different childcare benefits or subsidized daycare, and then feeling the full cost of all of those, all those expenses. And it was also very consistent across ages. Youth age 18 to 29 felt the income solution most strongly. It might not be surprising, knowing what we know about jobs and precarious employment, that youth are struggling to have a good income. For people aged 70 and up, retail changes sort of pushed ahead a little bit of income solutions, which was an interesting one because people, most people who are over 70 are receiving some sort of guaranteed income. So they may have been retired from the workforce, receiving old age security or other income in that way. And finally, this question did not vary based on the neighborhood that people lived in. So whether you lived in the East End, the West End of the city, if you were up in Airport Heights, by the mall, in Shea Heights, Kilbride, people wanted to see action on income. We know that from other studies that 65% of people who experience food insecurity in Canada are employed. But people who are working low wage or part-time jobs often can't afford the food that they need. And just again, referencing Sister Davis's presentation this morning, when we looked at some of those priority issues for people in Eastern Health, in the top 3 was that cost of living was a top priority to address alongside health in the Health Accord. So for any elected officials, when we are thinking about actions and advocacy stances to take, we're really seeing here, this is a clear message for any level of government. If it's municipal within St. John's, provincial or federal, people know that food insecurity isn't a food problem so much as it is an income problem. We know that there is plenty of food available in Canada, but far too many people can't afford to buy it. And so then this real answer to food insecurity is actually ending poverty by raising wages and social assistance rates, removing any barriers to education and employment, and then making housing and childcare affordable to address that cost of living. I wanted to include one last slide, which I don't think made it in today. So you can stop screen sharing there, Martha. One person wanted to say that the prices that they're experiencing needed to reflect a diversity and that it be affordable for non-wealthy individuals. And that if another food program occurs, it should occur with local vendors. So this is really what's on our plate. We need to see good incomes, affordable prices, and that food programs support our vibrant local food system. I wanted to thank as well Daphne Marsh for recognizing and acknowledging the potential for food to heal, that food is powerful. It's much more than a basic need. Food nourishes us, it builds community, and there's a lot of potential here for action in the months ahead. I just wanted to thank you all again for being here today, and I'm very eager to hear what our discussants have to say about what the food system means to them and how we can assure everyone can afford the food that they need. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Maybe a little early, but I'm happy to have some questions or open it up to discussants, Martha. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it's really important to recognize the value that such research brings to our understanding. And also, it's not just about numbers, it's the people behind those numbers who have that lived experience. So I think when we look at food insecurity issues, we just can't look at what we call the hard data, but also the experiences behind that. So thank you for bringing that forward. We have two discussants to join with us this morning. Dr. Emke, Ivan Emke, is with Memorial University, and he volunteers with local groups on the Great Northern Peninsula. And Debbie Wiseman is a founder of the Sharing the Harvest and volunteers with the Social Justice Cooperative. I'm going to start first with Ivan Emke, who will speak about food sovereignty and extending grow seasons on the Great Northern Peninsula. So I'll hand it over to you, Ivan, and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'm doing something very old-fashioned. I have no PowerPoint. I have no fancy pictures of goats or backyard greenhouses. But what I'm going to do is I have 9 thoughts for 9 minutes, because that's about the length of time that I have. And if you remember 3 of those thoughts, I'll be happy. If you remember next week 1 of those thoughts, I'll be ecstatic. So here we go. And this sort of picks up from where Sarah was just leaving off. First thought, why bother with food after all? I mean, the connection to health is clear. We can't talk about health and ignore food. The now slightly new Canada Food Guide mentions that food is not just calories and minerals and vitamins and so on, but food is a social context. It's where we cook together, we eat together, we share together. And a disconnection from that is as important as a disconnection from nutritious food as well. I don't think you can create community without food. I know people have tried. You can try, but it won't be much of a community. So sharing food and producing food together is a pan-cultural ritual of the highest value. It's not just production, but it's also the preparation and the sharing as well. So we put food on the pedestal there. Number 2. Well, why can't we just all buy it at a store, for somewhere else, which we're giving that a pretty good run for the money at the moment. But the value of growing food, the value of gardening is not just in the food itself. It's largely in the social and the therapeutic value of working with plants and with animals, with gardening and gathering, as well as the healthy benefits of a wider variety of things. Now, therapeutic horticulture teaches us that spending time in nature is a key aspect of health, both physical and mental. What's, a little question here. What's one of the most common elements of people who reach 100 years? Gardening. I'm not kidding. When you give up on growing food, you give up on life. And there are studies from the blue zones. These are the areas of the world where people live a long period of time. And there are some commonalities. There's things like a mostly plant-based diet, social support group, moderate exercise, and residents who garden, who grow food, who pick food, who gather, who hunt well into old age. So gardening offers mild exercise. It also gives us vitamin D, which is something we need during COVID-19, apparently. Working with soil exposes you to natural bacteria and minerals and microorganisms and helps your gut health and all kinds of other things. Why during COVID-19 did so many people discover they have a kitchen and space for a garden? Because those helped people to deal with the stress. Number 3, where are we at the moment? Taking stock. Well, some people say we're at 10% of growing our own food, some 12, some 8, some 14. It really doesn't matter. Let's not get caught up. It's too low, like it's not enough. Many countries or regions, when they get over the 50% and they're bringing in more than 50%, they get really worried. But we're a little bit oblivious to that at this point. The positive thing is, we weren't always here. You know, we've kind of come here. We've sort of, by 1 or 2 small steps a year, we've become less and less able to provision for ourselves. So the positive thing is that we can do some things together. And if you're the kind of snarky person who says, I don't care if you're growing tomatoes on a balcony or a carrot in a garden, it doesn't help us, then you really need a mood reset. You really need to sit in the corner for a while and think a little bit, because growing a carrot isn't just about the nutrition, it's about all of these other things that I was alluding to earlier. 4, how do we grow more food? Well, there's lots of ways, and there's lots of people on this call who have better ideas than I do about how to do that. But we'll start with something, I call this community agriculture, and it's a word that isn't used very much, but just imagine in your head 2 balloons, 2 large spheres. And the one on your left, which I think that's your left, I can't figure out this Zoom thing, but let's say that is, we'll call it self-provisioning. So feeding ourselves with our own labor, gathering, hunting, fishing, and gardening and all that. The one on your right, or whatever we are now, is the one that is commercial agriculture. It's the newer entrant in terms of human history anyways. It's doing the same kinds of things as self-provisioning, but at a very different scale. So these 2 spheres, though, are joined by another one in the middle that overlaps both of them, and that's called community agriculture. That's the space where the 2 spheres, they borrow from each other, they learn from each other, they enter into discussion with each other, and we need spaces where that can happen. And community gardens, community kitchens, some farmers markets, food hubs, things like that do help with that. But we have to acknowledge the importance of both of those spheres, and especially the thing that pulls those together, because it's really a bit more like a continuum. We've got a Cargill and Syngenta and Bayer on one end, and we have you with your 1 tomato plant in the balcony on the other end. But you're all part of the same overall process, and you have a link with community agriculture in the middle. Number 5. Well, what is this self-provisioning and why should I care about it? And I include hunting in here, by the way. The kind of red meat that we are best at producing in Newfoundland and Labrador is moose. 8 million pounds a year. That's a 1/4 pound per person in the province per week, which according to the food guide is enough red meat for all of us. But that's a whole nother presentation. But it doesn't show up in our food security statistics. And fortunately, Debbie Wiseman's going to talk in just a couple of minutes about moose as well. But building a food system is really a lot about changing our culture and our expectations. So the kind of energy that you see in the survey that Sarah just talked about, that you see in the backyard farming and homesteading group, is really important to us. That has over 31,000 members. There are more people who click on items there than click on the items from our only provincial daily newspaper. 31,000. You can get about 11 or 12 MHAs elected with 31,000. I'm just saying, okay? Number 6, how do we grow more food? Well, we need to make more space available, open up new land for food production. I know we're trying to do that for commercial agriculture, but it really should be done for community agriculture as well. We have a bit of money spent on community gardens, but that's out of whack with the importance that community gardens would have. Municipal regulations, they need to refrain from their outdated ideas about limiting gardens, limiting small animals within their rather inflated boundaries these days. Many new Canadians come from traditions in countries where it's expected that you have land to grow some of your own food. That's what civilized nations do. And so we really need to be able to meet the needs of, if we want to have immigration seriously, to meet the needs of those people as well. And in post-COVID, how do we create a new generation of parks and gardens which give more space, outside space, to communities and individuals? Those have been shown to be very important during this year, and there's no way, I hope, that we go back to where we were. Number 7, and you get my point. The prime directive I'm saying here is that we need to grow more of our own food this year than we did last year, and that's something we as individuals can take on as communities, but also as a province. Season extension, and the original title that I gave for this, that was weeks ago. So I've been thinking of different things since then, but that had to do with season extension, particularly on the Great Northern Peninsula. But I'm not necessarily talking about big greenhouses, because it can range from big greenhouses to a plastic pop bottle cut in half and then used for plants. So and most season extension technology, to be honest, is closer to the plastic pop bottle than the huge automatic greenhouses. And I know greenhouses have a bad name in Newfoundland and Labrador, but we need to sit in a corner and get over that. just like many other things. But passive solar, earth sheltered greenhouses. I saw Dan Rubens on the call. He's been working in earth sheltered greenhouses. There's some good examples. What we need is more examples that you as a gardener or communities can go to and say, hey, this is how much it costs to build it. Here's how you build it. And this is what it does. We don't want to be growing tomatoes in the middle of winter. That doesn't make a lot of sense in our climate. It doesn't make sense even in Iceland, which has free hot water. A few people do it, but by and large, they've gotten rid of that. But there are many things that we can grow for additional months or start early and use it as a living refrigerator. We also need to choose some good cold weather crops and some good seeds that are hardy from this area. 8. Okay, you're saying, Ivan, I don't want to grow anything or raise anything. I just want to eat something, but how do I support local? Sarah was talking about some of those things, the real appetite, if you will, for hubs, for markets, for direct sales. And we need to also exert pressures on retailers as well, because retailers, there's like 5 major retailers in Canada, grocery retailers, they're buying each other out as we speak. And there needs to be some way to sort of control that. And the federal government is starting to understand this is maybe something we should deal with. The other thing would be consumers. I can never figure out why we buy out of season produce, because it doesn't taste like strawberries or tomatoes or whatever. But we've come to these expectations about what we eat year round. Anyway, the hubs, the other thing is about hubs, we've learned a lot about cooperation from the craft beer industry, which isn't really food, but we've learned about how they realize that competition is good and they want to work together. Number 9, last one. I'm talking about big plans, but I'm talking about small steps. Sometimes the steps forward might seem really small. You know, I'm just saying, well, just grow a little bit more, another row of carrots in your garden. But the steps we've been taking backwards have also been kind of small. And we continue to take small steps backwards. And we say, well, we'll just do this one thing. We'll just stop this development here. We'll just build here instead of using it for land. And so that's how we've ended up going where we were. What would it matter, you might say, if we stopped having gardens? Well, a key for food security, food sovereignty, but also the power of food is that we need to find some way for people to exercise their concerns. So, okay, you say food security is really low in Newfoundland and Labrador. We grow 10%. So you start to get anxious and worried. So the beauty of food is that there's something we can do, and we can give people an agency so they and their communities can possibly do something to move forward. Will people gardening and fishing and hunting and so on feed us? No, but we'd be far worse off as a culture and as a people if we do anything to restrict any of those activities and restrict any attempt to provide for ourselves. I mean, we've got a failing rate of 10%, so we really probably should do something here or there. Any cultural trend, I think, that nurtures this would be valuable. So we're reviving our communities, it's simplistic, one carrot at a time, but just like when you're at a rock concert and you all turn your lighters on, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? One light from one individual 1,000 times over makes a big difference. I'll just end. This is a great quote from a gardener. This is from the UK. And there's a seniors who put together this community garden, which, I mean, the beauty of community gardens is all of the activity that happens at that garden among the people who are there. She said, by doing something infinitesimally small, like this tiny little gesture in this tiny little group in a tiny little country somewhere, you're working towards something that makes you feel more hopeful. That's important. It's a positive step. I'm not saying this is a magic wand or cure-all, but it's a positive step. And so the kind of changes I'm talking about here today are tiny gestures, tiny groups in a tiny little province somewhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Ivan. That was really energizing, and I'm now inspired. I have grown carrots and tomatoes and learned what an abundance of zucchini can happen in this province. So watch for special deposits here and there next summer. I'd now like to ask Debbie Wiseman to come and share her recent work around sharing the harvest, moose meat, food banks, and policy in Newfoundland and Labrador. And Debbie, I'm just going to call up your slides.
Thank you.
Hope that the screen gods are kind to me, and we will go from there. So
Okay. Hi, folks. Thanks so much for allowing me to be a part of this amazing event. And I also loved all that energy, Ivan. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how Barry Fordham and I got the provincial government to change decades-old legislation to allow the donation of moose and caribou meat to food banks. First, I want to tell you about the group that I'm a part of, the Social Justice Co-op. They believe that by working together, we can bring about social, political, and economic transformations necessary to avert climate catastrophe, while also creating better jobs, economic equality, healthy communities, genuine respect for Indigenous rights, food security, and a renewed hope in our collective future. So I went to my first co-op meeting just about 2 years ago, but really got involved when COVID came into our lives and meetings went to Zoom. Before that, I don't think I'd even ever heard of Zoom before, but I think I'm an expert at it now. Within the co-op, volunteers are free to work on projects and attend meetings on things they're passionate about. My advice to anyone who wants to advocate for anything is to surround yourself with positive, passionate people, like those people at the co-op. I truly believe I wouldn't be the advocate I am today without them. And personally, I am passionate about making life better for people who live in poverty. One of our teams within the co-op is the food sovereignty team. We believe people have the right to healthy local food. While at a meeting, we got to talking about food banks and the lack of fresh food and the lack of locally sourced food in those food banks. I wondered about local foods like moose and caribou. Were hunters allowed to donate to food banks? I remembered seeing someone in the news talk about it and it not being allowed here and that they were trying to change it. I was going to look into it and get back to the team. And the first slide there is the article that I found that I knew I had seen, and that's Barry Fordham there in the picture, and he's the man leading the charge. So I messaged Barry to ask if this change was in the works. I couldn't find any recent articles saying it was, and this one was from 2018. I thought surely it had to be in the works, but I know government works slowly, so I assumed it was in the works, but it wasn't. I soon found out. Barry got back to me and told me that not only was it not in the works, he hadn't even been able to meet with the minister in charge of initiating the change. And honestly, I was baffled. I couldn't understand why Minister Byrne would not at least meet with Barry and his group to hear them out. I told him that his idea was a really good one, and that our group could help if he wanted, and he graciously accepted. At our next meeting, I spoke to the group about it, and they gave me some ideas of how we could arrange to get a meeting. And for the sake of the timeline, this was July 2020. The first thing I did was write a petition. Barry and the team helped me, thank you. Barry and the team helped me to make sure I had all the points I needed in it. We launched it and shared it around social media, and the response was overwhelming. As you can see, we got over 1,000 signatures within a week. So I'm just going to read a bit of what we had in the petition so you can get an idea of what we were asking for. As we have seen during Snowmageddon and the COVID-19 crisis, food insecurity is a huge problem in Newfoundland and Labrador. Demand for hampers at food banks in our province is growing annually. In our province, 13.4% of households are food insecure, meaning they have inadequate access to food due to financial restraints. 26,000 of us use food banks, with 2 out of 5 of those people being children. The demand for food often outweighs the supply. So what can we do? One way we can combat this is to allow hunters to donate to food banks directly, to allow those food banks to share the harvest with their clients. Presently, there is an outdated legislation in the Wildlife Act, which prevents this from happening. Government has suggested convoluted workarounds, which further stigmatize food bank clients and have privacy concerns. I'll just add here that one of the things suggested was having the hunter give the meat directly to food bank clients. So the way that this suggestion would work is that the hunter would have to have a list of food bank clients and their addresses and drop the meat off themselves, or they'd have to sit in a food bank all day and hand a package of meat to every person that came in. So obviously there's privacy concerns with that. Going on, healthy food should be able to be gifted to the needy without question and without conditions. The solution is to implement a program like Hunters Helping the Hungry in Newfoundland and Labrador. The idea is simple. A hunter would take a moose to be butchered at a government certified butcher to ensure that the meat has been handled properly and to safeguard food security. The meat would then be donated to local food banks. Barry Fordham has been championing this cause for years. Barry is the head of the Outdoor Heritage Coalition, NOHC. NOHC has over 3,000 members and continues to grow. Their mandate is to discuss issues regarding resource use in the province, with particular emphasis on our wild resource of game and fish. And they also address significant issues with the appropriate government agencies with the purpose of effecting change on behalf of outdoor enthusiasts. Hunting has always been a traditional means of improving local food security in this province. Hunters routinely share their harvest with family, friends, neighbors, and community members. Our Indigenous people know how important it is to share the harvest, but giving to local food banks remained illegal. And so what we proposed was that the government to add one little paragraph to the legislation, which said, in the case whereby a hunter wishes to donate moose or caribou meat to a food bank, he or she may do so, provided the meat was cut by a certified butcher and the animal was harvested that same year. And so we released that petition at the end of July. Barry and I were immediately contacted by the media. I think the first person we spoke to was Bernice Hillier at CBC. And just so you know, this was my first time speaking on the radio like that. And I am not somebody who is used to that kind of thing, and I'm still not used to that kind of thing. But it was really important to me that I speak out on this issue. And I just wanted to say to anyone listening, if I can do it, you can do it. So like I said, the petition quickly gained 1,000 signatures. All these media requests started rolling in. We still didn't get to talk to Minister Byrne, though. Our emails went unanswered. He wouldn't speak to us directly. He would only talk to the media on his own, which I will admit was very frustrating. He would bring up reasons for not allowing hunters to donate that we had already thought of and had provisions in place for those things right on our petition. So he had to have seen them. The public reaction to this was 99.9% positive. People could not understand why we had to fight for it for so hard and so long. They couldn't understand why the minister would not meet with us either. And I still don't understand why he wouldn't meet with us. The only negative things we heard were from people who didn't understand the process of hunting and preparing a moose. And once that was explained, they were fine with it. In the following weeks, Barry and I realized that we were not going to get anywhere with Minister Byrne. He was not going to meet with us. So we planned how we could get around him. We had members of the House of Assembly who were willing to bring this forward. In the House of Assembly, it's preferred that the minister who is in charge bring a change forward to legislation, but there was a way to get around that, and we were prepared to take the fight in that direction. We were prepared to do whatever we had to do. We had everything in order to do that. Then the Liberal leadership election happened, and Andrew Furey was our new premier. Premier Furey installed an almost completely new cabinet, and Jerry Byrne was out as the minister in charge. And Elvis Loveless was in. Barry immediately fired off an email to Elvis Loveless's office. And I mean, he probably was in office 5 minutes when Barry sent this email and asked for a meeting. Having dealt with so many roadblocks up to this point, Barry has actually been advocating for this for over 10 years. We were shocked when Minister Loveless's office called us to arrange a meeting with us. Very happy, but shocked. We received some advice prior to the meeting that we should propose a pilot program to the minister, that we would handle any donations. Hunters could bring the donations to us and we would distribute them, and that we would just deal with food banks in St. John's this year and expand province-wide next year. We wanted to make it as simple as possible for the government and the least amount of work as possible for them. Next slide, please. So Barry and I, along with Lucas Roberts, we started a nonprofit called Sharing the Harvest to facilitate all of this. And this is a fun part of the story for sure. Barry and I were so worried about this meeting. This was our chance, right? Maybe our only chance to talk to the government about this. We prepped for the meeting. We ran through scenarios of arguments and things like that. And when we finally got to speak to the department, they were just all for it. We didn't have to fight. We didn't have to argue. They just agreed with us that it was a great idea and just wanted to know how we could move forward. We were dumbfounded. We talked to each other after the meeting and we still couldn't believe it. I think we even sent out follow-up emails to confirm that, yes, it was approved and we were going to do it. But I won't say it was easy. Like I said, it was years of work for Barry. But Minister Lovelace was so open to the idea. That's all you need is somebody who's open to ideas. And we are eternally grateful for that. And we're also really grateful to his staff who worked really hard to get all this in place. So a couple of weeks later, we were preparing to accept donations. We coordinated with the minister's office and realized that they actually had a bigger scope in mind than we did. They were going to open this up to hunters all over the province, and we didn't have to facilitate all the donations. Hunters were free to donate directly to food banks all over the province. So we ended up getting what we wanted and even more. This was mid-November. Next slide, please. This is a little news story about it. The time period for the 2020 program was short. We didn't have a lot of time left in the hunting season then, about 6 weeks, and most hunters had already gotten their moose for the year. We still ended up getting hundreds of pounds of donations. What we did was accept the donations, put our sticker on it, they're like in the picture, label it with a code so we knew which hunter it came from because we had to keep track of that, freeze it, and then when it was frozen, we donated it to the food banks who wanted it. And so I wanted to show a couple more images just to end my presentation, these two here. So I want to include this image of a freezer full of meat. The freezer was donated to us by Leon's on Elizabeth Avenue, and it sits in my living room right now, right next to me, ready to accept donations again this fall. I also wanted to emphasize that we are a 3-person show right now. While we have lots of help, we don't have an office, we don't have a staff, we don't have anything like that, and we were still able to do this, make this monumental change. And in the other picture, that's Elaine Balsam from Single Parents Association, accepting our very first donation. We distributed donations to Single Parents Association, First Light, and Bridges to Hope this past year. And we've gotten really good feedbacks from the food banks and even from people who received the donations through the food banks. And we can't wait to help facilitate even more donations this coming season. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. What a great way to end our session this morning with some great examples of on-the-ground action. And your description of the process, Debbie, I think is very useful for people who are embarking on change in their own communities. So I appreciate the detail you brought to that. We do have some time for a little discussion amongst Debbie, Ivan, and Sarah. And I thought I might start with Sarah first to see what thoughts you might like to have on what you've heard from Ivan and Debbie.
Thanks, Martha. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear such different perspectives. I think, you know, it takes a lot of people to create these kinds of change. There are small ones. Ivan mentioned a few different, like just do something. And then Debbie was able to pick up on something that had been many years in the making and just find the right timing, coming prepared, and just being savvy that now is the time. I think that theme of now is the time is something we can take forward in this Policy on the Rock session and into the afternoon, because there's a chance now to make a really big impact. In the chat, someone mentioned like the members' bill for universal basic income, that these kinds of solutions are gaining traction, and there's a willingness, because we have this crisis of the public health emergency, that action needs to be taken.
Thank you, Sarah. Ivan, what are your thoughts?
I like the idea of so many different ways in which we can move something forward. And I think that agriculture and food, very broadly understood, is a huge tent, but so often we get caught up in fractions between these. I spend a lot of time with commercial farmers, and I didn't mean to diss them in any way in this presentation, I didn't. But I think that we're all moving toward a certain direction, but we have to figure out that we are moving in the same direction. There's lots of space for local production here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think the moose piece has always been very interesting to me. And I remember when I used to go to blueberry festivals just to eat the hamburger that was caught, not caught, hit by a car back when they used to allow that sort of thing. And you just wipe the grit off of it and it was great. But I just think that's such an example, because in Newfoundland and Labrador, there is still a tradition of self-provisioning that kind of hangs on with some of the older generation. We skipped a generation that, wanted to not ever eat a turnip again because it reminded them of poverty or something like that. But to see that interest develop again, so that we have a bit of a leg up in the sense that people understand the value of self-provisioning, of gathering, of hunting, of fishing for your own food. So in some ways, we really need to benefit from that. And I know Food First, I've always appreciated the fact that they recognize that tradition that is part of Newfoundland and Labrador, and we need to build on it. We're not building something new, folks, here. We're just kind of fixing up the garage and the barn that got torn down when we got all excited about being modern and buying bread in bags.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, almost good afternoon. I'm in now. I've joined it. It took a long time at the vaccination place, so I'm just back now.
Okay, thank you. We're just continuing our discussion with Ivan, Sarah, and Debbie. And I wonder if you could share with us before we close out this morning, something that you've learned that you think you will carry forward from your work. Ivan, you talked about the idea of community gardens and people coming together in food hubs. Sarah, you talked about people looking at accessing their food, active transportation, where food is located, along with whether or not you have the resources. And Debbie, you spoke about the processes in terms of getting something that was fairly readily available, but bureaucratic processes set up barriers that interfered with people actually getting access to that food. And I think, Sarah, your story at the beginning about the shared experience with your colleague in terms of salt fish cakes and how we bring people together. What thoughts, what important learning would you like us to take away this morning?
Yeah, today I really focused on our St. John's food assessment. And, this food assessment is a community-led process. We're excited that there's going to be increased awareness and engagement with food issues in St. John's, and that there's this opportunity for collaboration and coordination with all kinds of different stakeholders. But the core at this model is that people understand their community strengths, and they know where things need to improve, and they're the ones best equipped to develop those solutions that'll work locally.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Ivan.
I think I'm always challenged by how to make some of the ideas that we have work for people in a variety of circumstances. And when we talk about food security, part of it is very connected to income insecurity as well. But I'm always challenged here and everywhere, how do we make some of these actions work? Because it takes a fair bit of energy to have a garden, fair enough. And sometimes people living in poverty or in other circumstances of inequality, it just takes a lot of energy to live, let alone start a garden and do a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm still challenged. I really need to figure out better ways or learn from people about how do we operationalize these ideas about community agriculture in communities that are at risk. Now, the fortunate thing, in some large cities, they've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. And so while we love to hate Toronto, there's an amazing number of community gardens there that are all run by a variety of people from various life circumstances. And the garden has been the connection and the political force, and it's actually worked. But that's something that I feel like I need to still work on. And I know that this kind of the CSC and having all of these people together, that's dear to your heart. How do we make some of these prospects work for a wider variety of our population?
Great, thank you. Debbie, over to you for the last word.
Thank you. I hope that people would take away from all of these presentations, and my presentation especially, is that one person or a small group of people can make a difference. A lot of times when you speak up about something that's important to you, you're told, nobody cares, it's just one person complaining, whatever. But a small group of people can really make a difference if they're passionate about the thing that they're advocating for. And I also wanted to say that, be willing to go about things in a different way. Be willing to, there's set ways that people say work, but always be willing to look outside the box and look at things differently and figure out different ways to do things.
Thank you, Debbie. Well, we've heard a lot of really interesting ideas this morning, some incredible strategies that have resulted in significant change, such as Debbie's example. Really good research that Sarah and Food First have identified, and looking at community food assessments generally, the information we can glean can certainly help influence public policy. And I think that the tiny steps that Ivan referred to can certainly add up to make change. Years ago, I worked with a woman who said, we never know what pebble it is that we're dropping in a pitcher that will cause it to overflow, but it's all those pebbles together that actually contribute to that collective change. And also to recall the first speakers of the morning and looking at digital technology and what access means and what those intersections around social circumstances and determinants and our access to digital, what does access mean in terms of improving our health, but also looking at improving our communities generally. We're going to break and we'll resume at 2 p.m. this afternoon. You have a different link to sign in, and those are in the emails that you received last week. Our afternoon keynote is Scott McAfee, and we will also be using the breakout rooms at 3 o'clock to bringing together in smaller groups to help generate ideas and insights that we will collect for a publication in our report. Also want to remind you that we are live streaming today's sessions, and we do hope to have recordings available. We want to make sure that they continue to be accessible. So the tech team here at CSC will be working on that. As I said, the page will be up on the CSC website, so I support you in going there to look for information in the future. So we'll see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I hope you have a pleasant break, and it's too miserable to go outside, perhaps if you're in St. John's, but at least stick your head out the window and get some fresh air after spending the morning indoors. Thank you, and we'll see you after lunch.